wonderful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and communication.
All the countries and research.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. Those joining us perhaps for the first time here for Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Again on Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, at the top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show now proudly in its 30th season. I want to thank you also for your suggestion of guests and topics to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. It is great to have you joining us this week. We have a great show lined up for you. Our first show is going to be with Brittany Hyman, someone who has been with us here on Dialogue Houston in the past. But I want her to come back and to kind of update us on the work she's doing, and also talk to you about a great new initiative that her and I and others are involved in called Houston 2036. But first, let me introduce her. She is the director of the Third Ward Real Estate Council. She'll tell us what that is and what the great work they're doing. And then we'll have a broader discussion about larger community issues. Let me just stop right there and say, welcome, Brittany. And so good to have you on Dialogue Houston.
Thank you, Larry. It's great to be here.
So tell us what's happening in the wonderful world of Third Ward Real Estate Council.
So things are going really great. So let me start by introducing you all to the council for those of you who aren't familiar with it.
Yes.
The Third Ward Real Estate Council is a nonprofit development company. Our mission is to create equitable opportunities in real estate through education, access to capital, and responsible development. In short, we're trying to create housing and commercial options for everyone. And the council came about after identifying a need, feeling and seeing a demographic shift in our community. A group of us residents got together and decided that we had the talent and the ability to make a difference. And so that's what we came together to do.
And really, the things that you focus on from policy and community engagement, but around the areas of education, access to capital, and responsible development, those are so key in communities, and particularly communities perhaps going through gentrification and going
Absolutely.
through other challenges. So tell us a little bit about that.
So what we did, we read our community, Third Ward, it's had multiple studies over the last 20 years. And so what we did, we read them, we went through them, we poured over them and tried to figure out where were the gaps that we could identify where that would get us from the study to action, to actual implementation. And what we saw was that if people had the opportunity to learn how they can go step by step, because most people are not going to pick up a plan and say, oh, okay, this is what I need to do in my everyday life. So how can we do that? How can we make it accessible and empower people through programming and education? Also, the hurdle to get capital for emerging developers is so high. So we tried to figure out how can we work together collectively to invest and to bridge that gap and to create opportunities where currently there aren't a lot of banking institutions that have products that we can readily use to say, okay, well, we want to put, maybe we can't build 200 units, but what if we came together and we can make 4? What if we can make, a small scale mixed use development? And so in the absence of those relationships with the banking institutions and the appropriate products, how can we leverage funding, grant funding, work together in private funding to be able to make that happen? And then lastly, with development, responsible development, everything comes down to policy, right? I spent many years working at the city of Houston in the Housing and Community Development Department. And so in that, I got to see how policies play a firsthand role in the way we live, how we can live, the things we can develop, where and why. And so if we can create models that work and engage people in a meaningful way and say, okay, this is where our policies can be changed. This is where they can be made better because every community is unique. This is what we need in ours. Would that help in the development process? So that way we could just lower, like I said, some of those hurdles for the emerging developers and the people who want to build in their own backyard.
Is the challenges going forward more about people collaborating together and willing to be collaborators, from the lenders to the funders to the developers to the people who are speculative about doing a real estate deal? It seems to me that the more I hear you talk over these years about this project, is that it really is the spirit of cooperation and the spirit of commitment together that's going to make this work, or it's not going to work.
Right. And, it always seems crazy until somebody does it. Right.
Right.
And so a lot of times organizations, corporations don't have a model to follow that says, okay, well, this is where we've seen it work on a small scale, but still be successful and profitable. And so sometimes it's just creating those models so people see that it can be done. And that's what we're working to do. We're taking that know-how from private institutions and banking institutions in our time at the city and saying, this is what we've seen work across the board. And then also bridging those relationships because we have them with the community because we live there, but we also have those relationships, from our time working in various capacities with the bank and with the city. And so we're bringing all those people together to the table.
And obviously in those relationships, trust plays the most important part of this, right?
Absolutely. Because there is always the unknown. People are afraid of unknown, especially when you're talking about federal funding. And it's like, well, I don't want to make a mistake and be accountable to taxpayers or banking institutions to say, well, why would I put money here when I could be so much profitable doing, a big box company, or I do 200 units instead of a few, instead of saying, okay, well, how is it possible to create a healthy, sustainable ecosystem where you have a ripple effect that goes from the small businesses out to the rooftops and back.
And you and the council have been good at bringing together a disparate group of individuals, organizations, and corporations to begin to look at and to envision what could be possible in that whole broad area that we call Third Ward, with other names attached to it sometimes, but it's all Third Ward. And to really look at what can be done, which I think is really beginning to open people's eyes as to the potential and possibility of how you think creatively outside of the box of what can be different types and kinds of development.
Absolutely. We had a few weeks ago, we actually did an event at the Savoy on Emancipation, which is an ice house. And you don't typically think of that as the place where you're going to do a public hearing, right? But
right.
But
it works.
We did. It works, and the small businesses, they want to be a part of the community. They want to help. And so they opened their doors to us. We brought together people who are followers of the campaign. We brought together people who are investors, and all in that space, in that relaxed environment, people were comfortable enough to talk about the issues that they're having. They were comfortable enough to talk about ideas that they had, innovations that they had around everything from food insecurity all the way up to mixed use development, and to meet one another in an environment that wasn't intimidating, that was welcoming, and just met them where they were. And so, we're just showing that it can absolutely be done. You just have to be willing to extend the opportunity.
It's part of that revelation, I would think at this point, that I need to be an actor engaged in this process so that I can have some say-so as to what will happen. Because the absence of that is going to happen to me anyway.
Absolutely.
So I might as well be the architect of my own development going forward and not let other people and other outside forces tell us what we're going to do.
Absolutely. And also recognizing the value in your lived experience.
Right.
We've gone through decades of brain drain where people come, from other communities, and they're paid well to come from other places to study the people in the community and talk and put everything to a plan and go back to where they're from. And, whether things happen or not is of no consequence because they got what they needed. And so for people to recognize that you having a lived experience, it's worth that's consultation. That is valuable, that's powerful. And so being able to help people recognize that encourages them to, yes, come in and say, how can I be a part of the context of the development?
Yeah, I think you hit an important note in the sharing and the conversation and the dialogue with human beings, other different types of individuals and others. That part about sharing and respecting each other's daily lived experiential realities, which you were talking about, everybody's realities experience. But I think part of what I'm seeing developing now is the importance of having a safe crucible to have that conversation and dialogue where the respect about those different daily lived experiential realities can be listened to, heard, and understood. And,
Right.
and the commonality of those experiences begin to emerge, yet profoundly different in many aspects. But those few threads of commonality that they have in common, that they can just put a little hook on, begins to open the door for a broader conversation, does it not?
Absolutely. And it's so powerful because what's happening in Third Ward is happening in communities like it all across the country.
Exactly. And I think what's happening across the country, and you said it well, Third Ward for the last 20 plus years is the most studied little piece of property, square miles of any part of Houston, Texas. To see now, to have all that data and research already done, to be able to say, look, we know all of that. We got that down pat. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Whom is going to be involved in the process of making it happen is where we are now, right?
Right, absolutely. And so we take every opportunity that we can to show people that we're here. That's why awareness is so important, because when you're looking for the people on the ground and the people who can do the work, it's important that people know that you're from there and that you can do it, not just because you live there, but because we're also urban planners. We're also finance professionals. And so you have in communities like Third Ward, you have architects, you have engineers, you have banking professionals. So why not come to them and let them leverage those tools in a way that can be impactful?
And since Third Ward is so close to downtown, it is such a desirable piece of property, square miles, that people have all kinds of ideas and thoughts about what should be put there, what should be placed there, what should be developed there. But in the end, it's clear that whatever those thoughts process are, it has to benefit the community.
Right.
In the end, it has to benefit the community. And that's the piece I think that people are beginning to come to realization that yes, but it has to also do this.
Right. That yes and is so important because you can still do it and be profitable. You can still do it and create economic opportunities, not just for your company or whoever's doing the investing, but also, like you said, for the people who live there who are going to come back day after day and put in.
Do you think we'll see more mixed use facilities and buildings?
Well, that is what people want. And so the hope is that we would see more. The obstacle that we have there is that it goes back to that access to capital piece, because you have a lot of financial institutions that say, well, why not just get together with a Target or a Walmart? How can we make the numbers work? And so the whole idea of our campaign is giving people the opportunity to come in and fill those gaps so that way we can get it done.
Yeah, because if you do it the traditional way in Third Ward of discounting single family homes, that's not going to get you there.
Right.
Because you have to also take into consideration all the townhouses and condos that have been built and multi-families living. But also I think part of it is to be able to attract a big box to any area is a more complicated process than most people realize, because so many of moving parts go into that decision.
And then there's
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. There's also the idea too that what's missing from the big boxes is that if you can empower a small business owner,
There
they're
you go.
investing in
There you go.
community, and they're investing in the success, not only of their where they work, but also, hey, this is also where I live, right? So they want to get that double benefit. And so they need those spaces, they need the opportunities. And that's what Emancipation Avenue used to be. It used to be small businesses, people who lived above their, salons and their professional offices. And so it worked then. Why wouldn't it work now?
And big boxes have the negative effect many times of running out and closing down small businesses and mom and pop businesses, et cetera.
Right. And what they like to say with big box companies is, oh, well, it provides jobs, but that can't offset.
At what cost? Jobs at what cost, though?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like that. So the question that always goes back from a historical perspective of talking about African-American neighborhoods and the changing dimensions of those, so much of this goes back to redlining, does it not?
Absolutely.
I mean, the whole history and pattern is so clearly delineated that the line is really just a great straight line. It's not even a broken line. It's a direct straight line.
And the fact that it was designed that way, it wasn't by accident. Policy to destroy communities. And I read recently a study that talked about how undervalued the assets in Black communities are. And they actually said that there is more than $170 billion in loss in retail real estate loss from devaluation.
Whoa.
Yeah, from devaluation of assets. And so it's not something that we say, oh, that was in history. That's not affecting us today. It absolutely is.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Can you imagine what our community would look like with that money?
Yeah, even let's even go back further than realize. All this goes back to slavery, basically.
Right.
That unbroken line.
It's so funny. I sat down, we were talking with a representative from a bank, and he was talking about the history of the bank. And he said, we got started off of cotton. And then there's this awkward pause where
right.
Right.
You kind of realize what he said, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Who made you rich? The slaves. Let's be clear. Who made you rich? The slaves. Simple as that. So let's pivot a little bit in the time we have left.
Okay.
You've been involved in this wonderful project called Houston 2036. You've now stepped up as a great community leader to play an even greater part, a bigger role in a conference that we're planning in next year, to January of 2023. Tell us a little bit about your vision and how you see the 2036 project.
So the 2036 project, let me start at the beginning. Your brainchild and came out of all of you all. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be a part of it, and recognizing that, hey, we're getting ready to come up. Houston is about to hit a great milestone and say, who do we want to be in 2036 for our centennial? What kind of community do we want for everyone? And Houston is a model for the rest of the nation in terms of its diversity. And if we can figure out a way to leverage the benefit of that diversity and to create communities that embrace that, that can set the pace for the rest of the country, because the rest of the country will follow where Houston goes. We're a model. And so you all put together an opportunity for thinkers from across different sectors, across different cultures and communities to come together and say, what does equity mean? What does it mean to have an equitable city? And so we've spent time talking about that, and we have an opportunity coming up in January to bring people together for that conversation and create that framework and say, what do we mean when we talk about equity in terms of spiritual, social, economic, and political ideas and ideals? What does that mean? What does the word equity mean? And how can we go forth achieving it in creating the Houston that we deserve to be?
I think you said it so well, because if diversity is a strength, which it is, and the goal has to be, how can the most diverse city become the most equitable city? And if diversity is truly a strength, which I believe, and I think most Houstonians, when you really get down to it, will say that it is. According to Dr. Kleinberg's survey, majority of Houstonians say that it is a strength. But you got to turn that into the reality, though, of being able to look at this question of equity and how it impacts every aspect of our lives.
Right.
And it impacts disproportionately some of our lives as Houstonians, predominantly persons of color. And how do we begin to talk about, as you said, equity and basically the four frames that really kind of usually make it up the question of equity, socially, economically, politically, and spiritually, and begin to see what is the operative definition of equity going forward, that everyone can at least in a baseline kind of conversation and dialogue agree on. That this is
Right.
the definition.
And to
And
be
if we can
comfortable.
get to that part, we can begin to talk about all the nuances, because that's where it's going to play out, all the
Mhm.
nuances of how that plays out in each one of those areas.
Absolutely. Because right now, equity, people, it's been a buzzword, right? People have been
Yeah.
talking about, oh, diversity and inclusion and equity, but
Yep.
what does it mean to walk the walk? And just because Houston is diverse doesn't mean that it is inclusive. It can still, in a lot of ways, be a very segregated city.
It
And
is.
so,
Well, let's go back to Dr. Kleinberg. We're the number one segregated city in America.
mhm,
We're the number one gated community in America. Even though we have this great diversity, the numbers are there, but the numbers don't always interact with each other. They don't always come together for common dialogue and discussion.
right. And there's a lot that gets lost there because Houston is a global city. And so all of those different enclaves has value and has things to learn from one another. So when we talk about equity and what it means to be equitable, it's a matter of not just talking about race, but also talking about power dynamics and talking about being willing to give up certain spaces for the greater good and being willing to also step into power, recognize and step into power. And so we're going to talk about that so that way we can say we can continue working up through 2036 to get, because it's not overnight. You know, we're not going to have one conversation and, oh, the problem is solved. We've been working at this for a long time. But if we're not willing to actively have the conversations and keep it in the forefront, then we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, because it really becomes, Houston is a classic example of the tale of two cities, of the have and have nots.
Mm-hmm.
And all these issues of inequality and inequities that go on, all these things we talk about, the social determinants of health, of education, it's really, when you pull the onion back, just the first layer of the onion, you don't have to go deep. Our education system is not an equitable system. Our healthcare system is not an equitable system. Our lending processes with banking is not an equitable system. Go down the list. It does not exist. It exists in the minds of some people probably, but in reality, it does not exemplify itself every day in what is fair and just and honest to each human being.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't talk about how it's not good if just one group of people has access and power and opportunity, because you have to live in a world with everyone else.
Yeah.
And our children have to interact with one another. How can we do that in a way that gets the most out of all of them? Because we've seen it time and time again in societies where you can't keep people marginalized for forever. Something is going to happen. There is going to be a shift. And if we can get ahead of it and do it in a productive way, then I think that's what's best for everyone. And it goes back, like you
Society
said.
is changing. Yeah, society is changing so quickly. And people who are feeling left out and marginalized are really beginning to push back, because they don't see themselves as part of the American dream anymore. The American dream has not reached them, or has passed them, or never even affected them. And so they feel very disenfranchised. And when you have people who are fearful and angry, that creates animosity, which creates hate.
Right.
And the hate is usually taken out on the other, because I have nowhere else to vent, no one else to vent to. So I take it out on the other because I can't take it out on the people who really need it, the power structure, the people really causing this. So I reach down rather than going up because I can't go up. I reach down or lateral to people around me who I just take it out on. And
Right.
that's what we're seeing.
And imagine having opportunity and access for hundreds of years and feeling so radically uncomfortable at the idea of losing it now.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
That's why DE&I in corporations many times is not moving the needle and it's not advancing as quickly because it has to deal with the reality of the frustration of the employees who bring all this stuff to them, who bring it to the workplace, who bring it to their jobs. And I think part of the fallacy with DE&I, unless you have really good trained facilitators of those small group discussions, you have to let all that stuff out and vent. You have to make space for people. They don't walk through your door of work and leave all this other reality that they're dealing with and facing all day at the door. It doesn't
Right.
work that way.
Yeah, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and recognizing
Exactly.
your own unconscious bias. And so, yeah, it's a great opportunity that we have for people who are really ready and willing to have those conversations to come together and figure out what tools are needed.
Yeah, and I think part of the tools and the toolbox of access that we need is training to be understanding how uncomfortable you have to be to let the dialogue go, but you have to have trained skilled facilitators to understand how to contain that,
Absolutely.
to allow it to happen, but also how to contain it.
Yeah, and be committed from the top down, right? Because
Yep.
even if you have,
Oh, it's all leadership. It's all about leadership. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
The leader has to set the tone, he or she, CEO, whatever you're going to call a person in charge. You have to really set that tone and let everybody know that, look, I'm going through the same kind of internal process my own self, trying to figure out where I am in this new world, in this new reality of changing demographics and changing everything, basically.
yeah. So,
But that's hard. That's hard, easier said than done.
yeah.
I know some, and you know some people who are really trying hard to work on it. We're going to have a conference in January. We'll talk more on Dialogue Houston about it end of January of 2023 that addresses this equity question. But it's also going to address the question of how do you have those hard conversations, those real conversations, those honest conversations,
Yeah,
and do it in a way that's productive.
I look forward to that one. That's one of my favorite things.
Okay, well, we'll have to do some hard work to make sure we get there. Brittany, I want to thank you. We got about 30 seconds left or so. I want to give you a chance to have any closing comments you want to make about the work you're doing, our Houston 2036. And I want to thank you very much for being part of the dialogue today. So the remaining time is yours.
Thank you so much, Larry, for inviting me on. In terms of the Third Ward Real Estate Council, we are in a growth phase. We have 2 properties on Emancipation that we are looking to develop. And in order to do that and close some of the gaps we talked about earlier, we need supporters. We need people who are willing to come and participate and do the trainings and events. So you can find us on Instagram at DT3M Fund, FUND, or online at www.dt3m.com. And for Houston 2036, there's a website, houston2036.com. If you're interested in participating and being a part of the conversation, reach out there. And hopefully we'll see you in the conference in January.
All right. And we'll let everybody know about the conference in January and we'll go forward from there. Brittany, thank you again. We're going to have to get out of here for this segment of Dialogue Houston. As always, until we come together again, be well, be safe, and peace, power, and love.